Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you very much for your time and for joining us. It is good to see you.
Always delighted to be with you, Liz, and your viewers.
So this is actually a pretty significant piece of legislation, and you don't actually propose things unless they are significant. So tell us why, indeed, you decided to go this route.
Well, I've joined with 48 co-sponsors in the Assembly in passing legislation that conforms to a federal law that authorizes states to do this, that will prohibit the state of New York and its political subdivisions from doing business with companies that do business with the Iran energy sector. It charges the Office of General Services with composing a list of companies that are doing business with Iran and prohibits them basically from contracting with the state or any of the localities, cities, towns, villages, school boards for goods and services in New York State. This is something that the federal government, the Congress, passed, authorizing states to do. So far, the state of California has enacted this legislation, and in California there is a list of 50 companies that are barred from doing business with the state of California.
So this would say specifically that you would be expected as a government entity to do, quote, everything possible to make sure that you are not doing business with any entity of which the type that you just described. Is there a penalty if you somehow fall short of that?
Well, the penalty is very clear. You can't do business with the state of New York. You can't do business with any of its localities, and we require specifically a certification in every contract that says I am, I'm aware of this law and I do not do business under the meaning of the law. So there's an affirmative certification that's required from anybody who does business with the state or any of its political subdivisions, but it requires OGS to actually produce a list of companies that would be ineligible to bid. So it should be easily traceable if anybody who's doing a contract with the state or its political subdivisions is on that list.
So the onus then is on the company itself to say, I, company name, do not have a business with Iran. And then it's then subsequently the onus is on OGS. And I would assume if it's found that you are somehow not being truthful about that, then you lose your ability, you get your contract yanked. Is that also in this legislation?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, the contract would be void because clearly that certification is not there. But the onus is also on OGS to compile a list.
Do you,
initially.
Do you have any idea what this might cost? I mean, in the past, there had been arguments. For example, when State Comptroller DiNapoli moved to divest pension investments from firms that did business with Iran or had investments in Iran, and the whole point here, obviously, is because it is deemed to be, its aggressive stance towards Israel, it's deemed to be a terrorist, or harboring of terrorists, etc. So the problem is, of course, that sometimes there's a firm, this firm that has ties that you don't like is actually more cost efficient for the state, or in terms of the pension, more beneficial from an investment standpoint.
This is not about, just about Israel. I mean, Iran has vowed to wipe the United States off the map, and almost every democratic country. Iran's human rights record is deplorable as to its own people. This is not just about Jewish groups. It's supported by, Turkish American Cultural Alliance, Association of Hispanic Mental Health Professionals, Korean American Community Empowerment Council. Again, this is not an issue of just Israel. This is a world peace issue. It's a human rights issue, and it is appropriate for us in New York State to step out and do this consistent with federal legislation authorizing us to do this. And yes, Israel is a target of Iran, but it's one of many. Iran is the sponsor of terrorism, throughout the world. That's clear.
So then what you're saying is, even if it came at a financial cost to the state, it's more important to make a stand, an ideological stand in this instance.
That's correct. I mean, we prohibit the state from doing business with a variety of companies for a variety of reasons. Having been convicted previously, maybe of bribing officials, they're off a preferred, a bidders list. They're prohibited from bidding, even if the state would save money doing business with them.
Right.
So that's usually not the criteria. We usually find that there is an appropriate purpose, and I think that contributing to Iran's ability to have nuclear weapons is something that we as a state do not want to be involved in.
So do you have any idea at this point how many of these companies the state might be doing business with currently?
I don't at this point. I do know California. I have a 50-company published list of those that are prohibited in California. I don't know how many of those companies at this point have bid on New York State contracts in the past. I don't know how many of those companies actually have contracts with New York State. But I can say that this is a message that I think is important for us to send against the host of terrorism throughout the world, and someone who is avowed to eradicate the democratic countries, including the United States, in the course of their rhetoric.
Have you had a discussion with Governor Cuomo or Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos about this? Because I would assume that you'll be introducing and passing it quite early in your House when the 2012 session starts.
We have not yet. This was introduced yesterday. In the Assembly. I hope to have that conversation in the very near future.
Speaking, though, of 2012, there was a story, actually, interesting story in the Wall Street Journal today, that you believe that there's actually a shortfall in the current fiscal year, but you don't believe that it will require action in a deficit reduction plan. Is that correct? Do you have any idea how large that gap might be?
No, I don't at this point. I just believe that the demands on our Medicaid system and our social service system are greater than anticipated, not because of costs. The costs have been kept under control. But the numbers of enrollments has increased in this state, I believe, and that is what the difficulty that may occur, and I think it's a manageable thing as we go to the mid-year, expectations as to the rest of the year. I just remain cautious. Within the next week or two, we will be required to have a conversation about mid-year results on our economic forecast, and I'm cautious that there may be some shortfall as a result of those things and as a result of the economy not proving to be as robust as initially forecast.
But not something that you would have to return to Albany prior to January to handle, something that you believe that you could actually deal with in the beginning of the 2012 session?
Well, I believe, this is all forecasting, and I believe in the end result, the three parties, Senate, the Assembly, and the Governor, will have to get together and try and find a reasonable place as to what's happening and where it's going, and then make that determination as to when and if it has to be dealt with, whether the governor can deal with some of it administratively, if there has to be something that's dealt with. But I think we're all premature at this point. And, we get receipts on a regular basis, and sometimes we get surprised.
Yeah, it seems... Right. It's unhappy surprises, clearly. I mean, it just seems that the governor is already on record saying that he intends to stick with the increased education and health care aid that he agreed with the legislature during this current budget season he would propose, despite the fact that there's a $2 billion deficit that could even grow, according to the state comptroller. And you have said in different reports that you don't want to see more cuts, no more cuts for you going forward. So it seems like it could be a little difficult next year.
Well, that's why, we in the Assembly believe that we should not be cutting the tax burden of people making more than $1 million, because that revenue of not doing that tax cut would provide the difference in the gap. And allow us to go forward with the education increase we promised and the health care increase we promised.
But you don't see yourself allied in any way with the Occupy Wall Street movement, that some of that movement is pushing for a continuation of the so-called millionaires tax?
I think we started our position on that long before anybody thought of Occupy Wall Street. We obviously welcome the message and the ratification and all the polling across the country and certainly across the state indicates that the public supports us on that overwhelmingly. And, the Occupy Wall Street has been very effective in putting that message out as well. But we are not adopting their message. If anything, they are adopting what we did.
And just before I let you go, the Zuccotti Park is in your district in Lower Manhattan, correct? Is that right?
That is correct.
And there have been a lot of local residents, Community Ward 1 folks, who are very upset about the incessant drumming, about potential health hazards. Today we see the mayor sending in the NYPD to take out generators and gasoline and other things that were violating rules in the park. I know you support, you have said, the First Amendment right to demonstrate, but what is your feeling about how long these people should be allowed to stay?
I believe people have a First Amendment right to protest, to demonstrate, look, I've been leading the charge, as I said, on the extension in New Year's of the millionaires tax, and so in that sense, I can identify with the protesters, and and I'm proud that they have helped focus much-needed attention on the issue. But there is another fundamental right, and that is people to enjoy their home in quiet enjoyment. And, the chanting and the drumming and other loud noises is something that we must recognize and they must recognize and preserve that right to protest, but also preserve the right of residents to peacefully enjoy their homes. What the mayor did today was enforce a violation of law which is hazardous. Storing gas canisters and in the park is not an appropriate thing, and the fire department came, asked for the generators, they were delivered to the fire department, there were no violence, there was no major protest, and again, if there's a safety issue, if there's a safety issue to the neighborhood around it, if there's a quiet determination that people are entitled to live, our community board has been very active, the elected officials, in trying to bring about and a recognition of both of those fundamental rights. And that's the key. People are entitled to live in their homes in peaceful enjoyment.
Well, Speaker Silver, I want to thank you very much for joining us. It is always good to see you. We'll be seeing you next time in Albany, I hope.
Okay, it's a pleasure seeing you. Thank you.
Be well.